Hello and welcome to another episode of Bare Bones Wargaming, a show with no bells, no whistles, no frills, just a man, a camera, and his game. On this episode, doing a couple things here. As you all know from previous episodes, I have been riding the Barbarossa train, but at the moment the train is pulled into the station. I gotta be honest, I've kind of exhausted myself. I feel like the Wehrmacht after they got to Smolensk, being just kind of whipped, worn down, and needing a little bit of rest and recuperation and reorganization before they get moving again. It's just the way I kind of do things. I get the bit between my teeth. I get focused on a topic and I just run with it. It kind of reminds me of when I was in Iceland for my honeymoon. Went there for 2 weeks. And at the time we went, it was the 40th anniversary of the Fischer-Spassky match. So there was a lot of things going on. Big celebrations, that kind of thing. They had a big exhibit at the National Museum in Reykjavik. So my wife and I went to this big flea market that wasn't too far from our hotel and found a guy that had some Bobby Fischer memorabilia stuff. So I bought some stuff and I came back a couple of times and was looking for other stuff. And I remember the guy looking at me and he's like, "You are Bobby Fischer crazy." And I was like, "Well, yeah, pretty much." I did get some cool stuff, though, to be honest, from him and things. But anyway, my point being that I kind of grab the bull by the horns and then exhaust myself on a topic. But this time I'm kind of taking a bit of break. Taking a break by taking a look at one of my favorite East Front games, which I haven't played for about 3 years now. But when I play frequently, I've played this a dozen times before. This setup you see before you. So I thought I'd go ahead and share that here as I take this little break. And then I've had some requests from some folks on Board Game Geek to do a playthrough of Lebensraum, which I just got my hands on. So I was going to do that, but then, like I said, I just felt kind of exhausted. So I decided, you know what, let me take a step back, play something I know well, something I enjoy, and then I'll go ahead and move forward with this new game. So that is the plan right now. So once I get von Manstein's Backhand blow played out here, then I intend to go just with the Eastern Front, of course, with the Lebensraum game. So that is the plan. So, of course, naturally enough, obviously, the game I'm featuring here is von Manstein's Backhand Blow from GMT Games. This was supposed to be part of the Schwerpunkt series, which actually was part of the T3 series, Turning the Tables, which there were 3 games previously made to this. The Turning the Tables, Drive to the Baltic, and the Veliki Lukai game. I forget what that one was called. But anyway, I tracked those down after playing this because I really enjoyed it. Found out the T3 system was the same system, and I got those, but nothing else has ever been done from GMT, and this game's almost 20 years old now. Okay, so that's what I'm going to go ahead and share with you here, what I've got set up in front of me. So, let's get to it. Now, first thing is this game is a little different in a couple of different respects, and we'll see how well I can zoom in here on one thing. That's the whole battle raging. This is already turn 3. But if you look here across the top, there we go, you can see where the German marker is. I don't think I can get this thing any higher. Let me see. Can I go higher? Oh, I can. Alright, let's see if we can look down a little bit more on it then. Hopefully that'll come through okay. But the turn is a little different because the turn is broken down into several phases, Schwerpunkt phases, that each side is able to do a certain amount of steps with each phase. That is dependent on C3I points, which are then turned into activity points each turn, which we'll get to here in a moment. There's also a general segment each turn where you're able to use your units without having to spend the C3I and activity points. So it is kind of interesting, and weather does affect how many of these phases you have. In this game you can have frozen, mud, and deep mud, and then of course some phases you skip because the mobility issue that is involved. So this is turn 3. I haven't checked the weather yet for this turn, but the first part of the game is usually frozen because the first dates, well, let's see, what dates are we looking at here? We are looking at February That looks like 6 through the 8th, I think is what that says there. I think it says 6 through the 8th. So, we're taking a look at that here to start the game. Now, victory is determined at the end of each turn by the victory point range that is on the track. For this turn, the victory point range goes from -2 to 15. So if the Soviets manage to get 16 points or more, we are victorious. Manstein has been beaten. On the other hand, if of course we get -1 points or more at the end of the turn, then Erich von Manstein has beaten the Russians again and has won the game. So I do like this game too, the way it's structured, because the backhand blow by von Manstein is one of those military situations that is extremely difficult to game, kind of like Incheon and Chancellorsville and Antietam. It's very tricky to do because of the unique set of circumstances and, you know, the fact that we have so much more information. So that's another thing that I really like about this game, having the C3I and the activity points that you'll see here in a little bit, is because it does leave some uncertainty, and it also makes it very solo friendly. Okay, so let's roll. So the first thing we're going to do, let's back out here again, and we're going to take a look here at the administrative segment. Now, the administrative segment is done by both players at the very beginning of the game. First thing we do is check to see if anybody is out of supply. Zones of control work in this typically like most war games you would think of. You know, enemy zones of control around you. You have to be able to trace supply back to your map edge. Friendly units negate the enemy zones of control, etc., etc. The usual suspects, if you will. However, up here I do have a German unit that is surrounded by a number of Russian rifle divisions. So those guys have been stuck, but of course they're slowing them down, tying them down, kind of like the reverse of what the Soviets did in a reverse situation, what the Soviets were doing in 1941, I should say. So that's the first thing we got to look at here, is the supply situation. Now, they are out of supply, and when you're out of supply, you have to do the attrition, which happens instantly after you check for supply. So for example, even if these guys, this had been the first time they were out of supply, you still would roll on the attrition table. So unlike some war games where it's like, oh, well, we're out of supply this turn, but we don't start checking to see if they get screwed until next turn. Nope, guess what? You get to check this turn. You are in deep doo-doo already to begin with. You are up on sanitary waters without proper means of propelling yourself forward. So these guys have been here since last turn, though. So, but I don't have anybody else out of supply. Everybody else can trace back. And there's no question here of like length and things like that. It's just basically so long as you could trace the path through to your sources is the key. So, I will roll for these guys here. Now they are isolated, and they are completely surrounded by enemy zones of control. So it'll be a +1 modifier, and if we get a 6, the Germans are beaten. What in the world was that? Okay, it is a 3. It's going to be hard to see, I bet, because I like this die, but it is hard to read at times. +1 is 4, so they're just hanging out still. So another turn where you might have to try and destroy them, being completely isolated. Okay? Alright, Soviet player now determines the weather. So let's see what the weather is going to be like. Now, so far, the first 2 turns, the weather has been frozen. Now, that can make an impact, because if the previous weather had mud, then it can, or deep mud, then it can modify the die roll. So let's see what we're going to get here. Alright, can't get much lower than that. Rolled snake eyes. So, that keeps the weather frozen just like it was last time. Okay? So, frozen weather means, of course, everybody's able to move around pretty freely. Okay? Next thing is, this is something starting on game turn 7 where the Germans are able to kind of reorganize things and stuff. Of course, that we're not going to be doing because we're only on turn 3. And you can also do in the game, there's one point where you can basically do what's the German equivalent of castling in chess, moving pieces around. Lets you move a lot of forces at once, but that is something you can't declare until later on in the game either. And the weather has to be frozen. Okay. Now, it is game turn 3, so let's see if the Germans get any variable reinforcements this turn. So we have this handy-dandy player aid card here. That gives us the reinforcement schedule and our variable reinforcements. So, game turn 3. Let's see if we get anything. Okay. Game turn 3, we rolled a 4. We get 1. So, we get to draw 1 out of this cup. Let's see what we get. Survey says, oh, it is a unit. It has a setup number. These guys are going into hex 1640. So let's see, 1640. Where are you, 1640? Up, down here, way down at the bottom of the map. Oh, it's not even on camera. That's how far on the bottom it is. There it is, right there. Okay, so drew those guys. They're in the game. They get placed there. Okay. Now, next step, the Soviets check their card and see what reinforcements they bring in this turn. Well, they've got 3 reinforcements that are supposed to show up this turn. They've got a guards rifle and 2 regular rifle divisions. So let's go ahead and dig them out here. So we need the 41st Guards. 41st Guards rifle, there they are. 41G. And then we need 107 and 304. 107 and 304. 107. Sounds like a radio station. 107.5. The Edge. Alright, 107 and 304. Come on, guys. Where are you? Where are you being? There's 1. There's the 107. And now I need, there's 303. Please try again. 304. Here we go. We have a winner. Now, these guys, you can do a couple of things with your reinforcements here. You can either bring them onto the map, wherever their reinforcement hex entry is, which is found on that yellow card for the Soviets. I don't know why it's yellow. It should be red. Probably because it would be hard to read, to be honest. But there you can see, this tells you what hexes to bring everybody on in. Or you can put them in your administrative box 1. Now, the administrative box, which let me go ahead and move you over here, and I'll zero in on the Soviets card here. This is one of the more unique situations in the game. You have these 2 administrative boxes. Basically what these administrative boxes amount to is strategic movement. It lets you move units around very quickly, both onto the map and move them from the map into these boxes, where basically they take time to maneuver around the front and then re-enter the map. Okay, so you can start by putting your reinforcements there if you want, or you can also put them in the hexes they set up in. Now, I think I'm going to do with this one, I'm going to do the 304 rifle in the hex they start up in, because they start up in 4419, which is pretty close towards the bottom of the map. So I'm going to let them come in there, and then these 2 guys I'm going to place in the administrative box number 1. So that's where they will be, and then we'll talk about administrative movement whenever we do the rest of the turn, because that's part of those smaller segments, those Schwerpunkt segments as they're called, which we'll take a look at here very shortly. Okay, now, next thing we do in this turn is the Germans get their reinforcements. So the Germans this turn get 3 units that make up the 333rd Infantry Division. Okay, so let's find the 333. Now the nice thing about units here is they are color-coded. So once you find one unit that belongs to that formation, you just have to look for the colors. Of course, naturally you gotta try and find the formation first. Oh, here we go. 333, right? Yep, the 333rd Infantry Division. Uno, dos, tres units that are part of it. Okay? So these guys are coming on into the game. Now, the front number here is your combat factor. The last one is movement. The middle one is your tactical efficiency rating. We'll talk about that when we do some combats here in a little bit. So a little bit of a different situation with the counters. And again, I can stick them in the administrative box or on their hex on the map. Let me double check their hex number and see where they're supposed to show up. Hex 1116. I believe that is... Yep, that's over here at Poltava. Well, you can see the actions over here. So, nope, I'll stick in the administrative box and try to whip them on. Plus, it'll give me a chance to show you how the administrative movement works for both sides. Okay, so those guys are rolling. They're going into the Germans' administrative box, which, of course, they have their own card. Or you might be able to see up here at the very top, there's also the administrative boxes on the map. Okay, so reinforcements are in. Now, the Soviet Union will get their replacement factor. So they get infantry and armor replacements. Okay. Basically, to get your replacements, you have to be in supply, but you also have to be within range of your front markers. So we'll take a look at that here in a second. They rolled a 4. Alright, so 4 on game turn 3. They get 2 of each. 2 infantry, 2 armor. Now, as I said, the Soviets have these front markers that are very, very important. Let me show you the bottom one here. We'll zoom in on the southwest front there. Okay. Now, this is important because in order for units to receive replacements or orders or anything else, they have to be within 12 hexes. You can see the 12 there on the marker of one of the front markers. There's another one much farther up the map, the Voronezh front as well too. So in order to make this work, you got to be within range of one of those 2 headquarters. Doesn't matter which one, but just one of those 2. Okay, you can be in enemy zones of control to receive your replacements. So unlike some other games, enemy zone of control does not really hinder that at all. And of course, you have to be able to trace a supply line, which again is just a path of hexes back to your supply source. Well, in this particular case, also as the Soviets, you have to be able to trace it back to your one of the front headquarters as well. So the Soviets do have 2 stipulations when it comes to that. Okay, other things like regular supply, they don't need to worry about it. They just have to trace. Okay, so 2 infantry, 2 armor. Now, of course, I could also go ahead and save those. You can accumulate those from turn to turn if you wish. Well, I do need to get some armored formations here built up because the Soviet armored formations have done a lot of work, but they've also been taking a beating too. So what I'm going to do is, let's make sure these guys are in range. So here's the front headquarters here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Kind of close, but they can get it. Okay, so I'm going to send those 2 replacements, and I'll go ahead and I'll flip those guys. Whoa, man, quite pretty strong replacements. They drove those Germans out right away. And I'm going to go ahead and flip these 2 guys and bring them back up to full strength there. Okay, so everybody's set there at full strength. Now I've got 2 infantry ones that I can use. Let's see. Now, infantry-wise, I don't really have too many units that are flipped when it comes to infantry. But I do have this guards one down here that I could use and build back up. So let's go ahead and we'll do that. And he's easily within 12. So that is the 62nd Guards. So we'll rebuild him for 1 point. Some of the units have more than just the counters that are on the map. Some of them have multiple step units that are used in the off-map holding boxes, which are above your administrative boxes on your player aid card. Let's see, the second one. You know what? I'm going to take the second one and put it with these guys here because I might want to go ahead and try and crush those Germans because they won't go away. Yeah, so I think I'll do that. Okay. All right, now, also on the turns, units and players may have to add or remove combat chits. Now, combat chits are just what they sound like. They are involved with the battles that happen here. We'll get to them here in a little bit once we get to those battles. Now, we also need to adjust C3I markers. Now, the C3I points you get are on the turn track, and you get points that you have when things are frozen, when the terrain is good, and then you also get points whenever there's any kind of mud, whether it's mud or deep mud. Right now it's frozen. So we're going to go ahead and give both sides their points. The Soviets get, whoa, sorry about that, 6 more points. I leaned a little too far forward there. They get 6 points, and the Germans get 2. Now, we're going to add those up here in the general records track at the very top. And you can accumulate these C3I points from turn to turn. So the Russians, I saved 2 from last time, which is now going to give me 8 points for this turn, and I may just go wild with those 8 points that they have. So they're going to go ahead and, oh, let's face it, I gotta slide this over and reach from this side. So that'll take them up to 8, and the Germans only have 2. So clearly the Germans at this point are scrambling with this offensive as the Russians drive back towards Kharkov. Alright, so that's our administrative segment. Now, the Soviets will move on to their first Schwerpunkt segment. Now, both sides have 2 Schwerpunkt segments in each turn. The Soviets go first, and the Germans go second. After both sides have taken those, then you have a general phase where, again, the Schwerpunkt ones, you need your activity points to either move or fight. You don't need that in the general segment, but your units can either move or fight. With the Schwerpunkt segment, you could technically move units and then launch attacks afterwards. But you can't do that in the general segment. You must choose. A unit may fight or it may move, but it may not do both. Okay? Alright. So, first Schwerpunkt segment. First thing we got to do is see if the front markers advance. Now, if the front markers ever get attacked by the Germans, they get driven back. Which, of course, can be a problem then, because then you can have Soviet units that can be out of range for orders. So, as a Soviet player, you do want to keep an eye on those headquarters and also keep an eye on pesky, fast-moving panzer units, too. So, I will start with the upper one, the Voronezh. I rolled a 10, and on R, which is on the Russian yellow card, as you can see there, our front movement table, 10 to 12, 2 hexes. So the Voronezh front can move forward 2 hexes, and the southwest front rolled a 4, which means they don't get to move at all. Okay. Alright, well, I'm going to go ahead and move the Voronezh front, I think, down this way, because I want to keep them in the thick of, oh, where's my pointer? There's my pointer. I want to keep them in the thick of the fighting down here. So I'm going to go ahead and swing them this way a little bit more, because they can still reach up here and give these guys orders, if I so desire to do so. So we'll go ahead and we'll move 2 down the road here into the woods, and we'll hide out from the enemy. Okay, now, administrative movement. Now again, this is a big difference to a lot of other war games. I mean, a lot of war games have strategic movement where, you know, you might double units moving, you have railroad movement, which this is a little bit similar to that, but you don't have to worry about any rail lines with this. This can really make the game interesting, and you do have to kind of keep a sharp eye out for what your opponent has in his boxes and where he might go, because it's very easy to get these things onto the map. Okay? Alright, so first thing we do is you can use any one unit from Administrative Movement Box 2 onto the map. Now the unit can either be placed near a headquarters or an in-supply friendly unit. Well, I've got a rifle division here for the Soviets. Got the, what is this, the 184 rifle division. So I'm going to try and press really hard to get across this river. So I'm going to bring these guys in right here. Now, if a unit uses administrative movement, they cannot move again during that particular Schwerpunkt segment. So we're going to mark those guys to show that they did administrative movement. Okay. Alright, the next step is you can move all units from box 1 to box 2. So going back over here, where we had the Soviets before, we moved the one guy off the map, and now we can move all of these guys into here. Now, of course, the thing is that you can only move one unit out of the box at a time. However, the Germans, if they have units all stacked from the same formation, like that 333rd Infantry Division, or Infantry Regiment rather, it's a regiment, that I just put in the administrative box. I can move all 3 of them together at once, which is kind of cool for the German player. Okay, so I move those guys over, but I'll only be able to move them one at a time onto the map. Now the last thing I do with administrative movement is I can take any one unit on the map that is in supply, within range of the headquarters, and I can move it to the administrative boxes. So for example, if some unit was really lagging behind over here, which I just have this one here that I put on the map, but if somebody was really lagging way behind, then I could go ahead and take them off the map and move them to the administrative box, and they'd be able to move faster and get back into the thick of the fighting by doing that. Okay? Alright, now that I've done that, now I'm going to go ahead and declare whether I want to move, fight, or fight, move. It's up to me. Typically, early on in the game, because the situation is extremely fluid, and of course as the Russians are trying to get through and crush the Germans as quickly as possible, I like the move, fight option. So I'm going to go ahead with move, fight for them. Okay. Now, I'm going to spend my C3I points. Now remember, I have 8. I can spend up to 3 at a clip. Okay. And then I roll 2 dice and see how many points I get. So let's find out here. I'm going to spend 3. So we're going to move the marker. 8 minus 3 is 5. And let's see how many activity points I get. For Mother Russia. To attack the fascist hordes. Woo, I rolled an 11. This one goes to 11. Woo, jackpot. Alright, 3 C3I points. 17, sweet. Now, there is a catch. There's always a catch in communism, let's be honest. So there's a catch. They have to be divided between the 2 fronts as equally as possible. So one front's going to get 8, one front is going to get 9. Okay? So since I want to try and force this river and try to get to Kharkov, because Kharkov is worth quite a few victory points, Kharkov is worth 10 victory points. So if I could quickly get into Kharkov early in the game, because remember, they just need 15, I could really put a serious dent towards winning in this game. The other thing, and this is kind of an odd victory condition, is the Soviets get 5 victory points for having a unit west of the Donets. Okay? The Germans get to subtract 5 points if they have a unit east. Now, as you can see here right now, I'm kind of in bad shape with that, but if you go way up here to where the river gets thin, I've got these 2 guys. Well, actually, only 1 guy. Shoot, I only got 1 guy now, just barely east of the river. So, in other words, those are canceling out right now, the +5, -5. But if the Germans get kicked back across the river, then the Soviets, of course, will be able to add those 5 victory points at the end of the turn. So I got to be careful with that. And I got to be careful with Kharkov early on here, too. Alright, so we're going to give the Voronezh front 9 points. And we're going to give the Southwest 8. Alright. Now, once you've figured out your C3I points, then you get to spend them. Now, I'm doing move fight. It takes 1 activity point to move 1 unit. Let me stress the 1 unit part. Because if you have a stack of units, let's say you have 2 units in a hex, it costs you 2 activity points to move them. So stacking together doesn't mean that you can only use 1 activity point to move them around. You must use 1 per unit. Okay? So be careful with that, because that's a little unusual. Usually in other games, hey, if you're stacked together, you can go ahead and activate together, no big deal. Not in this game, okay? So you do have to be very careful with your stacking and activating stacks, because they all can't go together. All right? Now, combat costs you 3 activity points. So again, you kind of have to plan ahead here. You got to figure out how many units do you want to move, and then you also have to figure out how many battles you want to have, because you have to save 3 points per battle to do it. Now, it doesn't care how many units are in the battle. Theoretically, you could surround an enemy unit with 6 units around it. If you had enough activity points, you could move 6 units and then attack after that. Okay? But in order to initiate a battle, you're going to have to spend 3 activity points. Alright, so let's start moving here. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and let's see. I'm going to try and draw closer to the river here. Not so sure about forcing the river just yet. Okay. And in this game, you cannot move directly from an enemy zone of control to an enemy zone of control. You have to exit an enemy zone of control and then come back in if you want. But you can't go directly from one to the other, which is why I've spaced the German forces out here on the upper Dons the way I have, because I'm trying to keep the Russians from being able to force the river. Plus, major rivers have the combat factor of any units attacking across them, so that's a big to do also. Okay. All right, I do want to be able to push as the Soviets down here. I have got, let's go ahead and zoom in. I have got 3 Soviet tanker in this area. Da. So what I'd like to do is try to keep pushing across the river here. Use these guys up here to keep pressure. Dun, 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 and tie these guys down while these guys come across in a spearhead, and then of course rip through here, try to get behind, and also try to push to Kharkov as well too. Right. So that's going to be my plan, is I want to save at least 3 points to go ahead and launch my assault. Okay. Alright. With that in mind, let's roll. Okay, so now these guys, I could backtrack and swing around. And I think actually, well, no, if I do that, these guys are going to get stopped because they're going to be in the enemy zone of control there. So, but I could initiate a battle there and try to clear this bend out if I wanted first. That's an idea. Okay, let's do that. So we'll move these guys first. So 1, 2, that's 1 activity point that I've used for the Vernage front. And then I'm going to move these guys across the river. 1, 2, to put some more pressure there as well. So that takes me down to 7. Now, I could move 1 more unit and then just basically, I could launch 2 attacks if I wanted, but I'm going to keep the pressure on here. So I'm going to slide these guys over. Takes me down to 6. Slide this tank corps into here. That takes me down to 5. I've got 2 more movement points that I can do. Let's see. Okay, I'm okay. Just double checking. I'm pretty sure I was within 12 there for those guys. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and move these guys over to anticipate launching an attack in the future, because I want to clear that and get those 5 victory points for the Soviets. And then I'm going to move these guys up 1, 2 to close in there too. Okay, so now they've got their 3 points left so they can launch their attack. Alright, now I'm down south here, so to speak. I don't have as many tank forces down here. I really only have 1 at the moment. So I'm still just trying to get across the river, see how far I can get, that kind of thing. So let me go ahead and try to engage down here. So we'll go 1, 2, and see if we can't beat up that German regiment that's already reduced. And then 1, 2 to cover the flanks. 1, 2, also to kind of cover the flanks. And then let's go 1, 2. We'll try to start cutting behind those guys. And then bring these guys across to kind of keep things close together too. And now we've got 3 points left for each front. So we can go ahead and initiate battle. Okay. Alright. Now, let's go ahead and let's do that. But then I might have to break this actually at this point and go from there. So let's go ahead and let's zoom in on this battle up here. We'll do this battle up here with let's do the battle up here with the Vernage front first. We'll start with them. Okay, so here we go. So now I'm going to have these Soviet units attack this SS unit here. So I've got 1, 2, 3 units that I can attack with there. So I spend my 3 points from the Vernage front, and now I'm going to go ahead and attack. Alright, so first thing you do with combat sequence is you go ahead and figure out who's all involved. Okay, I've got 3 units that I'm going to attack with, and then figure out the tactical efficiency rating. Now, if you manage to get a concentric attack, which basically is all the hexes are covered around the enemy, and this counts even if an enemy unit is adjacent. So, for example, if this SS unit that's yellow, if they were in this hex or this hex, you still would get the concentric bonus. So, friendly units don't negate that like they do in some other games. Okay, all right. So, I'm going to go ahead and use those guys there, and basically now we're going to compare efficiency ratings. Now you take the highest efficiency rating of whatever unit is attacking. Here in this particular case it's the Soviet Tank Corps, it's a 5. Okay, so they have the highest efficiency rating. It will be increased by 1 because of the concentric assault, so that actually will be 6. The Germans have a 4. Okay, now the number is how many combat markers you get to draw from your cups. Okay, so let me go ahead and shift you down here to show you how that works with the combat markers. Okay, so the Germans will get to draw 4. So let's go ahead and draw 4 out here. There's 4. Okay, so we've got, what do we have here? Battlefield domination, we have leadership, -1 hit, probing, Soviet motorized half. Now some of these have preconditions, and it tells you on the player aid cards, if you look at the back, it tells you if there's any preconditions with these. So like for example, the battlefield domination, which they each have a number on the front, so you can always just take a look and see. You can see if there's a prerequisite. Okay, so like for this one, you can only use this if the Germans have tactical superiority, which they don't. It's a 6 versus a 4. So that one will be worthless. There's no sense in using that. So let's go ahead and we'll pick the 1. Now the reason we only get to pick 1 is because the Germans do not have tactical superiority. So we pull the 4, and you pull however many there is, 2, 3, whatever, and you only get to keep 1. So they're going to keep the 1 for the leadership. That's what they get. Now, the Soviets will get to draw 6 because they have tactical superiority. And then they get to pull 3. So even if your tactical superiority was, say, 4 to 3, of those 4 markers you pull, you would still get to keep 3. So in this particular case, I get to draw... Oh, I need 1 more. I need a 6th one because of the concentric bonus. So hold on, I need 1 more and I get to keep half of them, which is pretty good actually for the Soviets. Okay, so let's see. I'll keep intelligence because that will take away the German chit. I'll inflict 1 more point of damage on the Germans. You know, I'll use the feint marker to reduce the Soviet hit. So all these will be in play. Now some of these have modifiers for combat values, plus or minus, depending on whether you're attacking or defending. So like for example, oh, let me see. Let me find one here. Hang on. Okay, so like here, this one here, early in the game, the Russians have this artillery unit that can either add or subtract 5 to the die roll, which is huge. That's a big, big deal. Okay, so the intelligence will get rid of the German leadership. So now the Russians will get 1 less point for themselves, and they will inflict 1 more point on the Germans because they have the ambush check. Okay? Alright, back up to the battle. So let's get up here by Kharkov. Let's fight our battle now. Okay, so now we got to figure out our odds. So we've got 25 and 10, 35, and 6 more is 41. 41 to 4, which of course is a ridiculous amount of points. That is 10 to 1. Now we got to check terrain here. The Germans are in a forest, and at least 1 unit is attacking across a minor river. So terrain modifiers, forest, or die roll modifiers, forest -2, Minor river, if some of them are attacking across it, is -1. So it's going to be -3 to the die roll for the Soviets. All right, so 10 to 1, -3 to the dice roll, sorry. And they rolled a 7. Now, in the game, a couple things can happen in combat with die rolls. If you roll a 3, it adds 1 extra hit point to the defender. If you roll an 11, it adds 1 extra hit point to the attacker. If you roll an unmodified 2 or 12, that triggers off a random event. Alright, so we check our chart here, 10 to 1 odds. 7 minus 3 is 4, and we look at the two numbers. So the number before the slash impacts the attackers. The number after impacts the defenders. So in this case, 2 to 1. But remember our chits. So the Germans have an extra hit. Now that's 2. And the Russians have 1 less. That's 1. So actually, the Russians have 1 hit and the Germans have 2. Now the defender can always take 2 hits as retreat. And if he goes through an enemy zone of control, then that causes a step loss. Okay? So in this particular case, these guys here, since they have to take 2 hits, and I have to go through here, I have no choice. These guys are destroyed. They're eliminated. Okay? And that will cost me a victory point. So now we're going to adjust our victory point track up to 0. Now the attacker always has to take their hits as damage. And remember, the Soviets still had 1, so I'm going to go ahead and flip this rifle one here over to its reduced side. Okay? If the hex is cleared, you can advance after combat, and if it is a motorized unit, you can actually advance 2 if the unit is eliminated or if the enemy retreats 2 hexes. So I'm going to go ahead and run those guys up into there, leaving the, the 12th Tank Corps, I'm going to leave them a little more flexible by not being an enemy zone of control. Right? All right. Now, when combat's over, you take the chits that were drawn for both sides and put them back into the cup. And that's it for combat. Alright, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and stop, because I don't like my videos to be too long. I'll try to come back and maybe show you guys more the general segment, what happens, because you have a good idea what happens here with the Schwerpunkt. Each Schwerpunkt segment has the administrative movement. Then you use your C3I points to make activity points, and then the general segment at the end, again, you can either you can move everybody or fight with everybody, but you must make a choice. If you fight with a unit, it can't move. If a unit moves, it cannot fight. Okay? Alright, so there you go so far, showing the first Soviet Schwerpunkt segment, because after you do the combat and the movement, now we would move on, although I have that second combat to do. And I'll remind myself that I still need to get to do this second combat down here by placing my nice little handy die. I always use dice to mark things if I have to go, or like if the telephone rings or something like that, so that I know where I left off. Which, of course, whoops, wrong marker, would be with the Southwest Front right there. Okay. So that's where we're at right now. So hopefully this gives you an idea how the game plays, at least. And then, of course, like I said, I may come back and do the general segment of the turn as well. Otherwise, I mean, I pretty much have shown you everything that you get to see here with the game, with this Soviet first Schwerpunkt segment. So, the game again is von Manstein's Backhand Blow from GMT Games. And this, as always, is Tim Korchmark from Bare Bones Wargaming saying thanks for watching. And I'll see you again, if not from the desperate situation for the Wehrmacht here at Kharkov, then from the grand strategic level, because the units are armies in Lebensraum, from the Lebensraum game that was released by Compass here in the last few years. As always, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.